entering the 최고 꼴레다 봐. 최셰르지. 도시. 자고르선도 카페송스.
So, first of all, which microphone am I speaking into? So, all of you have come together here, and Rinpoche is about to deliver a little speech explaining a little bit of the Dharma, giving a little Dharma talk, Dharma instruction.
And in the Hindu, Tajir, and Tajik, Kashur Changu Shubina, the Mambuchi Kilia Shuadi, Jixosu,
So if in this way we talk about the Dharma, if it's being spoken about, if it's being taught in such a way, then an understanding of this Dharma, of such teachings, can arise within ourselves. That's the whole point.
Any that Lahaul entering there, any chickadad de Muchin number capture Muchin Tame, as Muchin number soda, Tahana Shimbian, Chickadad Lama, Kimbo, and Givishing, the Mangushi Gilia, Dejima, Shadi, those Kabutos. Muchin number down, Lama Tribuku, and the Mangushi Kimbo, and the Mangu Gilia Deje, get a shady, so the Kabutos.
In the presence of that. So, having said that, it is also necessary to say that so many masters, teachers, Rinpoches, Khenpos, etc. and so forth have come together here, that in the presence of all of these accomplished and learned masters, it is of course not an easy thing to talk about the Dharma. It is rather more difficult.
And the Cameroon Muchitanda data, they should be in Zantagran, should they be in do, and Chigma Sushadi, Kabushushtu.
Particularly also in the presence of His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa, who has been kind enough to deliver a talks actually yesterday. It is indeed.
They shared Kabudus.
So, who remains with us in his residence right now. Again, under such circumstances, the delivering of such a teaching is not an easy thing. However, already, as we have had the fortune of hearing talks on the Dharma by His Holiness yesterday, he will again be gracious enough to reappear to again teach us some of the precious Dharma. And he will then be gracious enough to explain all the various points about which we might have to know, which we might have understood about, or which we might not have understood about yet. So also to be in this in the presence of all of these masters who have assembled here, accomplished masters, learned masters, Khenpos, etc. and so forth, it is also necessary to show one's proper respect towards them. Also, all of you have come here, have assembled here, the assembled sanghas, the various students who have come from all over. This is a very nice thing that you could have come.
Ani tamunge delia tarinde ta ngazo Drukpa Yugi ani chigyu de chungbe ta logeya khorwege ani ta tanda dengazo logo ani tujin ta cheda seshimares ta te chegebres
So, in particular, as you all know, this is the assembly of the followers of the Drukpa Kagyu tradition, which is one of the Kagyu traditions from the so-called 4 greater and 8 smaller or 8 lesser traditions. And having come together as followers of the Drukpa lineage, which has persisted for over 800 years now, this is the first large annual gathering of such sort.
And and Cameroon Jawan Drukpa, Yangaba Chimbu, and Cameroon Buchituji.
And this entire assembly has been made possible solely through the great kindness of His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa and also many other great masters. It's due to their kindness that we are here in the first place.
안 다가나 신베기 겹지 감주rum부시 아니 우슈고 톨레 아니 캠부시루 라다 다나 신베 아니 뱀발라체 아니 잘레나게 망고샤레 다디나게 망고샤요제.
Also His Eminence Kamtu Rinpoche, as well as our good Khenpo Shedrup and many other helpers have worked tirelessly to make this assembly possible.
안 다가나 신베 아니 지금 다른 안수데 아니 지금 무슨 겹지 무슨 남부 소다 아니 라주 캠프 망부지 당한도 다른데 신성 중앙이 무슨 참은 좀 무슨.
So due to the kindness of all of those who have helped, who have worked tirelessly, it is possible that His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa, all the other masters, Khenpos, etc., could come together here for this gathering. And that being the case, Rinpoche says he himself is filled with great joy of this. It gives him great pleasure. It also gives Rinpoche great pleasure to see so many Dharma students, so many Dharma friends who have come from so many different places. Also all the sanghas who are assembled here, the various Drukpa sanghas who have come from such diverse places as Bhutan, as Ladakh, as Kasha and so forth, the sanghas that have come from Sangak Chuling and so forth, which is the seat in Darjeeling, all of them have assembled here, and that is a cause for great rejoicing.
Nepal la shugingi number soda and a chicken and pegging and a chichoro mangushadu. Nepal showing chicken and pegging and mangushadu.
Of course, there are also those who reside here in Nepal itself, and of course, also all of those who have come from abroad, from far away.
Any Indians and Samanali Shragi, the Jaya Chumba Shragi Gauchos.
So again, all of you having come here, having assembled here at this time, at this place, that indeed fills Rinpoche with great pleasure and is a source of his personal rejoicing. Then Rinpoche would also like to thank his translators, such as Lama Namgyal, who's in the cubicle over there, and also the various other translators who are here to translate into all sorts of languages. So the main topic that Rinpoche would like to speak about in the course of this teaching is the importance of correct motivation. And there will also be a little talk about the various masters that have established and have continued the glorious and precious Drukpa Kagyu tradition. So yesterday already His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa has been speaking about the very words of the Buddha himself.
다가 총도 쏘고. 이거 가시 년. 총도 쏘고 됐어. 근데 비가 끝난 총스.
Also, His Holiness has already been teaching the Dharma a couple of days before, while all the masters, the Rinpoches, Khenpas, etc., and so forth, have been assembling. He has been speaking in particular to them and has been teaching the Dharma to them.
디갑레 군준네 까나야래야 아니 지르상계기 템바 아니 양고 등교 반된 쪽에 템바스 스칸나소스.
In particular, His Holiness has been speaking to them about the teachings of the Buddha in general, as well as the particular teachings of the Drukpa lineage.
근데 인자 나란조 다 셰사마시나 사기야 걸규 닝마 기루 다 간디지미네 참말라 아니 지르상계기 템발 투리에 버렸어.
Generally speaking, when looking at the various traditions, which there might be, Kagyu, Nyingma, Sakya, Gelug, and so forth, all of these traditions teach nothing other but the teaching of the Buddha.
아니 상계기 아니 템바디 아니 미 지데리아 중제 론니동압야 클라스 쪽이요지.
Generally speaking, one can say that this teaching of the Buddha, that the Buddha himself has taught and has spread, has persisted in this world for about 2,500 years.
근데 인자 아니 상계 구충백네 비윤 단 네발나리아 루미는네 임르제.
And indeed, we find ourselves in the very country in which the Buddha himself was born. So Nepal, which at the time did not exist as such, is the actual birthplace of the Buddha.
아니 제 상계백네 노지데 안 다가나심 추주고르고네 와라나시 냥엘렌 되겠네 안 산조종 다 야가난 제제 간다이니 야가다 비유디 상계 좀 된데 그다음에 샵자세 다 간다 초고조 제버제제 내리 규리버스.
And then, after having been born in Nepal, it is commonly known that the Buddha then proceeded to various places. He eventually found himself in Bodh Gaya, where he demonstrated the achievement of enlightenment. He then went on to Sarnath near Varanasi, where he delivered his first sermon, his first Dharma talk, and he consequently and then eventually he passed away in the place that is also known as Kapilavastu. So these are the four main stations, so to speak, in the life of the Buddha.
다티네 상계 좀 된데 아니 지군냥을 대사비 제리야 아니 지다 로십경 압야 이미지 제리야 아니 지다 변경 파벌 루르로서 바니 진주총니 다든지 중앙에 뭐래 파벌 루르로서 봐 로십경 압야 제리야 주장을 해도 봐.
Then, approximately 400-500 years, we do not know exactly, 400-500 years after the passing of the Buddha, the great Indian master who is known as Arya Nagarjuna appeared in this world.
근데 이메인들 아니 지 야가나리아 로종나세네 아니 지 낭베 줄라가 치모 아니 지 날린다다
The Dharma was then spread, it was taught. Particularly, one institution sticks out, so to speak, which was responsible for the teaching and the spreading of the Dharma, and that was the great monastic university of Nalanda. And there were, of course, also others like Vikramashila, Adantapuri, and so forth.
낭베게 간다 남바 상계비 추게 아니 따와도 좋다세 답에 상계가 숭디 상계가 공과 여대버디바 십심 차반에 맞달 나와요 뭐 제 나와요 뭐세.
Starting at these great monastic universities such as Nalanda, Vikramashila, etc., the various traditions, the various schools of Buddhism came into being. They evolved, so to speak, out of these institutions, the various viewpoints and schools as we know them nowadays.
아니 다 된제기게 남바상계비 가서 타니에 나래 줄라한 세스도 줄라한서 and Zulakhan, the university of Shumarita. Zulakhan Shumareste, Zulakhan, Zulakhan Shubina, Nalendala Solana Chum.
So these places, such as Nalanda, etc., they were known for the great monastic institution, the great temples which were erected.
Zulakhan said, Zulakhan says. Zulakhan temple, that university sources. University sources. Sundays. Nalendala. Tadine Zulaks Labdua, Pugel Chibina, Zulakhan's name. Zulak said to Daharana Carre, Zux to number, Sangi Catilia, Zux. Lux to number, any Chictai, Casolegi, dangerous or Tigedilla, and a conjure the danger to daddy. And a Zux to number, Conjula Code, Sangi, Conjula Code. Lux to number, any Chictingula Code.
These institutions, which in Tibetan are known under the name of Tsuklakang, were institutions in which, on the one hand, the very word of the Buddha himself was taught, which refers to the first syllable of the word Tsuk, and there were also institutions in which the entire commentarial literature, the commentaries, the treatises which were composed upon the words of the Buddha were taught, which refers to the second syllable of the word, lak. And generally speaking, when speaking of the teaching of the Buddha, the word of the Buddha, again, this can be subdivided into the scriptural teaching and the teaching that has been put into experience. So there's the scriptural or the commentarial as well as the experiential teaching. Accordingly, in all the various monastic institutions, be they of the Kaji, various Kaji schools, or of the Sakya, the Nyingma, or the Gelugpa schools, invariably we find two types of differing institutions there. On the one hand, there are the so-called places for accomplishment, which are known as Drukpa in Tibetan, and then there are the university-like study institutions, which are known under the term of Shedra in Tibetan.
Tende yindu ta tende diye ta khungtu ni chimbi na che sangje rangi ta kada ani pege di jel phebe ani dangerous ta kana loben so ya ga ni ta mas ka so phebe ta loben di to de besta ta tende ge ni pege chi ye de ba di zen chimbi na li khore le ni chi ga ta di zen chimbi na ani sangje ge ka ti na dangerous to de besta.
So if we were to speak in terms of a lineage or of continuation, we would have to start at the very origin, which is the Buddha and the teachings, the words that the Buddha himself has taught. Accordingly, these teachings are also subdivided into two main bodies of texts, so to speak. There's, on the one hand, the collection that is known by its Tibetan name of Kanjur. In the Kanjur, there are only contained the very words of the Buddha himself. And then we have the other collection, which is known as Tenjur, which contains the various treatises and the teachings of masters who appeared later, who appeared after the Buddha, such as Arya, Nagarjuna, and so many others. These monastic institutions, monastic universities, such as Nalanda, Vikramashila, or Dantapuri, and so many others, they produced a great number of not only accomplished but also supremely learned masters. One of these masters who was a product of these monastic institutions and universities was the great scholar and Mahasiddha Naropa.
And Naropa and Chimbo.
And it is commonly known that Naropa was extremely learned.
And it Penitsu and it's Marbolosa, Shujlodron, but using Marba to Penitsu Garalpe, Marbolos Naropa Jena.
It was that master, Naropa, whom the great Tibetan translator Marpa came to see. Marpa traveled all the way from Tibet and came into the presence of Naropa.
And the name Kasurich Marbani Margubeta, Tavo, Casamarbani Margub Mila, and Tavos and those Majin Chonse.
Then Marpa eventually returned to Tibet, spread the teachings that he had received, and as is commonly known, his main student was the Lord of Yogins Milarepa, whose main student was the great master Gampopa, and so forth. After Gampopa then appeared one of his main students who is known as Pagmudrupa. He's then followed, particularly within this Drukpa lineage, by Lingjerepa. Then he is followed by the one who's known as the protector of beings, Tsangpajare. And as we know, Tsangpajare, who was Lingjerepa's student, he was the very first of all the Jalwang Drukpa Rinpoches.
and Zangba Neta and the Chungdenberg, Chugu, Tanazoni, Gamurumuche, Yawandubo Junior, that Jun Hajiva, that the tuning.
Since then, since that time, the first Jalwang Drukpa Rinpoche, Tsangpajare, has reincarnated again and again, and the present His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa Rinpoche, whom we know is the 12th in this lineage of incarnations. In this way, being able to meet him shows that all of us have indeed accumulated great merit. Nowadays it is the case that the life expectancy of people, so to speak, does not really exceed much. Does not really exceed much the age of 80 or 90 or so. At the very most, occasionally there will be people who turn 100, but they are very few.
Lineage the Gagane, Cheve, Kanda, Pene, Cheveta, Dune, Chevetan, Himalayan zone, Mazuchi Terina, Peneta, Logia, using Chadures.
However, this particular lineage of ours, which has spread all over the Himalayan region, has persisted for more than 800 years.
You do some so sometime
So if we should think about someone who had experienced all this story which already has been going, this history which has already been going for 800 years, that indeed is a very long duration, a very long span of time.
Misit lo gyare dina nangba imbechen so so ya je lo de be nidong abja lasi be so sam ko
Even if we were to look at the existence of the teaching of the Buddha itself, which has been in this world for over 2,500 years, it gets even better. The duration of time becomes longer and longer.
다 루규스야 디 히스토리스 와다 루규 디디 야랍 루규 카리안 디디 다 콩다고 쉬우지 거야 데 개침 차대 상도서야. 와.
So knowing a little about this very history, how the teaching and the various lineages, etc., have evolved, how they have come into being in the first place, is indeed of some importance. Now, if we were to concern ourselves with history thoroughly, there are the various histories, the various collections of stories, etc., as they have happened consecutively. So we could actually read up on these very comfortably. However, without wanting to go into too much detail, it might serve as well to hear a little about the very general features, the very general parts of this history as it has evolved from the time of the Buddha through such masters as Tilopa, Naropa, Mapa, etc., and so forth, until the very present day. When we think about it in terms of getting in touch with this by way of having accumulated merit, this is a very important point to reflect upon, to contemplate. Now, going back to the very beginning, to the time of Tsangpa Gyalpa himself, he was known to have established the two seats of the two monasteries, which are known as Druk or Namdruk, and the other one is known as Ralung. These were the two main seats which were established by him. Particularly when Tsangpa Gyalpa came to the site that became known as Namdruk, as the seat of the Drukpa, there was the very auspicious occasion of his seeing or witnessing 9 large dragons which soared into the skies. Based on that experience, based on that vision of Tsangpa Gyalpa of these dragons, then eventually the lineage that evolved out of his establishing these seats, etc., became known as the Drukpa lineage, Drukpa being the Tibetan word for dragon. What basically happened then, how the lineage evolved, that for the most part is common knowledge. Then in a couple of days, day after tomorrow or day after tomorrow, however it is written down in the program, we will hear from Se Rinpoche and also from other masters how the lineage has evolved, particularly in their parts of the world where they reside, in the various Himalayan regions. So generally speaking, we might ask ourselves, are there such things as dragons? It is not as if one could actually go somewhere and see dragons, or is it?
강생 생계요 생계 가보 여러분 this
It is very much like with these creatures which are known as snow lions. It is not as if any one of us could say of him or herself that we have actually seen a snow lion, or have we?
가시 개발 가시 되는 순간에 생계 가서 생계 가면들 여 말해서 키 생주세요. 키 생주세요.
There are even some scholars who say quite clearly that that which is known as snow lion does not exist. Rather more, there's a particular type of dog which has a similar appearance, and that very well could have been the very model for that which was eventually known as the snow lion.
아니 다가난 신백이 제가 이내단 내가 아주 님의 라마든지 아니 지금 군전이야 변에 생계 가면 오마세야 되거든요. 생계 가면 오마세야 더 많이 와요. 되게 소요게 되어다.
However, on the other hand, there is such talk about preparing certain substances out of snow lion's milk.
이내 니삼발이야 단단 하나서 두바스야 두디 즉 피게 즉 리모유 되게 두디 즉 개장 멤버체 조조데 두게 가시네 여러분.
Well, however that might be, back to the dragons, we might come up with a certain idea, with a certain picture of how a dragon might look, and we might paint these, we might draw these. The one thing that we can take for granted is that there is that which is known as the cry of the dragon, or the sound of the dragon, which we commonly know as thunder.
And the name Nibadilia drew tongue singing the dragon, me Mangusharia, drew tongue in the dragon.
And indeed, there are supposedly such few individuals who have indeed seen, who have indeed witnessed the appearance of a dragon. Rinpoche himself says he has an acquaintance who says quite clearly that not only has he heard the sound of the dragon, but he has actually seen the dragon. And that person describes it in such a way as that he has been looking at the skies, there were clouds, and he saw such a dragon move between the clouds very quickly. So as Rinpoche is describing, like it was this sort of movement that was made by the dragon as he flew among the clouds. And furthermore, he describes the dragon also very clearly, and he says the color of the dragon was very clearly green. It's about 30 years ago or so now that Rinpoche has been told this story. The person who told Rinpoche that story all that many years ago, he's rather old now, he's in his 80s, he might be 86, 87, something like that. He is also known as a very skillful painter, as a very skillful draftsman. And again, when he was relating this story to Rinpoche, he said quite clearly, there was a dragon, he had such and such a shape, and his color was very clearly green. However, there's also that tradition within our lineage of when we actually get down to depict the dragon, that we depict the dragon as being white of color. For instance, on the great Drukpa flag, the dragon is also drawn or is also painted as being white in color. So, when coming about talking about the color of dragons, whether it's this or that one, that doesn't actually make that much of a difference. So, if there would indeed be such a being, then it would have its various features for sure. So in this way, the Drukpa lineage, the Drukpa lineage came to be known as such. And just in the very name of the Drukpa lineage as such, there lies a great blessing, a great inspiration. So having said that, Rinpoche would very much like to continue now with the actual subject of his talk that he would like to speak about rather, which is the importance of giving rise to proper motivation. So if we think about it in a proper way, then giving rise to the proper motivation is not a difficult thing at all. The proper motivation will indeed arise by itself. So thinking about the proper motivation, it is clear that we have to learn, that we have to recognize what it is that makes proper motivation, or that makes motivation the proper one in the first place. And it is important to know about the features of such motivation, to understand these features, as His Holiness the Jalwan Drukpa has very clearly pointed out yesterday. Bringing about a proper understanding is of utmost importance, is absolutely essential. As His Holiness has said yesterday, what is it that makes proper recognition? It is to recognize things as for what they truly are, as they really are, looking at the various features they are and getting the right idea about them. So very clearly, to give rise to the proper motivation or a proper attitude is of very great importance. So how do we bring about such a proper attitude? How do we go about this attitude building in the first place? Well, as we have heard already so many times, the proper motivation has to be at the very basis of this attitude building, so to speak. And this holds true not only for followers of the Buddhist faith, as we are, There are also the other religions of Christianity, there's the various Hindu traditions, there is Islam, etc. and so forth. If we look at the basic teachings of all of these, we will invariably see that everywhere there is great emphasis being put on giving rise to a proper attitude, giving rise to proper motivation. The very heart or the very essence of the teachings of the Buddha, if we were to stick to these, is again and again said to be the giving rise to a proper attitude, to a proper outlook or motivation for that matter. It has been said quite clearly that without a proper motivation, a proper attitude cannot be brought to bear or to arise. So accordingly, in the framework of Buddhist teachings, Buddhist instructions, we again and again hear how it is necessary to give rise to the so-called enlightened attitude, which is also known by the commonly known term of bodhicitta, the awakened heart, if one were to translate this literally. So this is what we have to motivate ourselves to do, to bring about this enlightened attitude, or bodhicitta as it is known, which is which is nothing else but giving rise, like letting this proper attitude or motivation arise within ourselves, letting it be born within ourselves. If we do not allow ourselves to let that happen within ourselves, then this attitude of bodhicitta, or the enlightened attitude as one could call it, will not be able to appear, will not be able to be born within ourselves. However, when we speak about giving rise to the proper attitude, giving rise to the enlightened attitude, to bodhicitta, etc. and so forth, it is not as if all of these are based on various types of motivations. If we do not strive to bring about the enlightened attitude of bodhicitta within ourselves, then if that is not a goal that we strive after, then in that regard there is no particular other motivation to be brought about. However, if we have given rise to the enlightened attitude of bodhicitta, then this is definitely based on the highest and the most sublime of motivations. As it says in the preliminary practices, in the practices which are commonly known as ngondro, there is a passage in there where we express the wish to practice Mahamudra for the sake of all beings who invariably have been our kind mothers in previous lifetimes. So in this way, we give rise to the motivation, to the attitude of leading all of these beings to liberation through our own practice of Mahamudra.
다 텐데베게 꾸노디 텐제게다 꾸노디 셈께 차게 제게다 꾸노디 얘기지. 텐제 꾸노디 셈께 제게 꾸노디 얘기지.
And practicing in this way, proceeding in this way, is a clear sign that indeed we have given rise to the proper attitude, to the proper motivation. In this way, if we then proceed accordingly, this motivation of ours, this attitude of ours, will gradually become greater and vaster. It is also an indicator for our having truly received or having truly partaken of the blessing and inspiration of our precious teachers, of our precious lamas, because only through that are we enabled to bring about the proper motivation and to maintain it. Therefore, let it be said again, it is of utmost importance, of essential importance, to give rise to this proper motivation, to such a proper attitude. If on the other hand we should not give rise to such motivation, then whatever is based on the lack of such motivation, so to speak, that will not really, nothing much will derive thereof. So when we speak about such motivation in the first place, there are 2 points which we need to take into regard. On the one hand, there is the very cause or the very origin of such motivation, and then there is the proper time at which this motivation should be brought about. It was the great Indian master Vasubandhu who has given that teaching, who has pointed out very clearly that there are these 2 components to it, which is the origin itself and the proper time at which the origin comes to fruition. So the origin, or the basis as one could also call it, is of utmost importance in the first place. Just like, for instance, if we were to erect a building, a house, or a stupa for that matter, there has to be a proper base, there has to be a proper foundation. And in the very same way, this foundation of bringing about proper motivation is what everything that follows must be based on. Now, generally speaking, when speaking about motivation as such, of course there could be various types of motivation. There can be proper, positive motivation. There can also be negative motivations.
Ducha Shedan Timu Nage Chado Saji, Gulu Debatia, Gugulon the Java.
When speaking about the basis or the foundation of all sorts of various different types of motivations, then these could be motivated on the basis of what is known as the emotional defilements. There is ignorance, anger, attachment, desire, etc., and so forth. Now, when it comes to these emotional defilements, such as desire and jealousy, anger, etc., and so forth, we do not need to do anything in particular to bring these to the fore. There is nothing that we need to do in particular to let these arise. These basically arise by themselves, without anyone being in particularly motivated to bring them about. What, however, needs a motivation at the outset is to bring about their cessation, to cut off these emotional defilements. Accordingly, it is said quite clearly, without having first given rise to the proper motivation, we will not be able to give rise to the enlightened attitude that is known as bodhicitta. That just doesn't work. Therefore, it is of essential importance to give rise to the proper motivation, because only on the basis of motivation, of proper motivation, can we proceed along these lines. Without such motivation, nothing much else will be of much success. Now, when talking about all of this in terms of Dharma, in terms of studying the Dharma, in terms of reflecting about with that which we have studied or heard, and in terms of putting it into experience by way of practice, let it be said quite clearly that this is not an easy undertaking. It is not something that comes easily. It is something that requires a whole lot of determination. Generally speaking, we find ourselves constantly involved in all sorts of different activities of the body, of the speech, of our minds or awarenesses. So we're constantly busy with the one or other activity of these or combination of these. And on the basis of these various activities of body, speech and mind and the various combinations thereof, all sorts of trouble, all sorts of inconveniences, etc. Arise.